All right, guys. So apparently 9 minutes and 26 seconds is the maximum amount of time I'm allowed to talk. And my football helmet was starting to give me a headache. So we're going to speed this up a little bit. Apparently YouTube doesn't realize how much I like to talk. So we are on Thomas Jefferson, talking about Europe, England and France in particular, trying to pull us into war. Washington, Adams, and Jefferson were able to prevent going to war. One of the things that Thomas Jefferson, or the main thing that he's known for during his presidency, was the purchase of Louisiana from the French. During Jefferson's presidency, a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte was trying to take over Europe, and the French controlled the Louisiana territory. And there's a city at the mouth of the Mississippi called New Orleans, which was able to control all the flow up and down the river. And the United States really wanted that city so that we could control trade in the middle of the country. So Jefferson sent 3 dudes over to France to buy Louisiana, gave him $10 million, said, excuse me, not Louisiana, just New Orleans. He gave him $10 million, said, come back with the city of New Orleans. Well, when the guys got there, Napoleon said, I'm not going to sell you just New Orleans, but if you give me $5 million more, I'll sell you all of the Louisiana Purchase. So when Thomas Jefferson was the president, the United States more than doubled with the purchase of Louisiana from the French. And just like a kid at Christmas who's looking at presents wrapped under the tree, Jefferson wanted to know what he purchased. So he hired 2 guys, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, who spent 3 years. They walked from the Mississippi River all the way to the Pacific Ocean and back. And it was quite the expedition. And I know I'm only spending a couple of seconds on it, but I don't want to run out of time again on this video. So Thomas Jefferson is known for the purchase of Louisiana. Well, why didn't he run for a 3rd term? Because George Washington only served 2 terms, and he set the precedent for all future presidents. So our 4th president became a guy named James Madison, who we've talked about before. Remember, he was nicknamed the father of the Constitution. Another Virginian, the 3rd out of the first 4 from Virginia. Madison is best known for when he was the president. He was unable to avoid war with European nations, and in this case it was England. So what the English were doing, England and France were fighting over the Americans, kind of like friends fighting over, you've got 2 friends and then one person's trying to be friends with both of them, but the friends are pulling them in different directions. Well, France and England both wanted to be our friends, and remember, the French and the English used to hate each other. Well, to make a long story short, we were not able to avoid war with England. And in 1812, James Madison declared war on England for the 2nd time in our history. The War of 1812 is a peculiar war. First of all, it's misnamed. It should be called the War of 1814 because most of the fighting took place in 1814. The first battle took place in Washington, D.C., where the British burned the White House to the ground. James Madison's wife, Dolly, refused to leave the White House. She said, I'm not leaving unless I have that picture of George Washington. And the Redcoats were closing in on the White House, and the First Lady refused to leave without the painting of George Washington. So if you visit the White House today, the only original thing in the White House today from the first White House was that painting of George Washington, because James Madison's wife refused to leave without it. Another interesting thing that you might not know about the War of 1812, that's how we got our national anthem. The Star-Spangled Banner was written by a guy named Francis Scott Key, who had been kidnapped and was on board of a British ship while they were bombing Baltimore during the Battle of Baltimore, obviously. And he wrote out what he saw, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. And then another funny story about the War of 1812. Oh, before I forget, after the Redcoats burned the White House to the ground, a big storm rolled in, and it killed more British soldiers than the Americans who were defending their city. So more British soldiers died from Mother Nature than the American army that were defending our nation's capital. If you could imagine that happening today. Give you an idea of that. Our country was not ready for another war. But James Madison felt he had no choice. The British, and I think I'm skipping over stuff because I'm trying to get through this before we get cut off again, but the British were hijacking American sailors and kidnapping them, basically, and saying, we don't believe that you're your own country, you're still a part of the Royal Navy. And they were looting our ships, and they were taking our